I'm looking at you all. I'm trying to memorize you because when I look into the emptiness of the camera, I want to memorize you. Well, here I am. I'm hot. It's hot. I'm so glad to see all of you. And as I talk to you, I hear my own voice. And I'm talking to myself as I'm talking to you. I'm encouraging myself to accept my voice as it is, and to accept my body as it is. So about 2 years ago, because of some neuromuscular condition, my muscles started weakening. I lost weight, I couldn't sleep, I couldn't talk. I had difficulty swallowing and coughing. I couldn't strengthen my muscles without severe cramping. And then I was having trouble breathing. And as most of you know, my diagnosis of ALS was proposed. And then it was reconsidered. And then it was raised again. And by last spring, I couldn't maintain oxygen saturation. I really could barely walk, and I was falling asleep even when I was working. I went to the ER twice during the height of COVID. So of course they acted like I was wasting their time, so I just kept going until I ended up in delirium and respiratory failure. And then I was hospitalized and intubated and exiled to intensive care without visitors. I could not accept how bad it was until it was a serious emergency and everything had to stop. And when our country was infiltrated by COVID-19, we didn't want to accept it. And many of us did not want to accept that we live in a racist culture until we saw a 9-minute murder of a Black man by a white police officer. But I've noticed that reality doesn't really respond well to rejection. The body at war with itself creates more tension. And in our country, as we trade scapegoats, we create more hatred. And not even Mr. Trump will succeed in getting rid of his enemies, though he tries and tries. These are violent times. Well, the monks of old also lived with violence, and many of the Zen stories or koans feature what seem like brutal trauma as a path to waking up. One of the most violent and spectacularly sensational is Nansen Kills a Cat. Here's the short version. At Nansen's place, the monks of the Eastern and the Western halls were arguing about a cat. Nansen noticed this. He held up the cat and he said, "If you can speak, then I will not kill it." And no one replied. So Nansen cut the cat into 2 pieces. What happens to you when you imagine that? Check in with your belly, with your mind. Is it not vivid, visceral? My cat was actually dying as I was sitting with this koan, so it felt very close. Why did Nansen cut? And what did he really cut? So, maybe back in those days before ethics committees and such, he really did cut the poor cat. But maybe he sliced into our separation. He sliced into the argument between the monks. He sliced right into the heart of the matter to make it clear that we and the cat are intimately connected. And it hurts to be separate or to think we're separate. So, I'm asking myself, what is violence at its core? And by definition, it's a physical destructive force with intent. But if you strip away the intent, I understand it as an abrupt change that makes us see reality, an emergency. And then clarity emerges, sharp and painful. And Roshi used to talk about, he still talks about near enemies, things that resemble or are near to each other, but one way works and the other way doesn't. So maybe violence is the near enemy of clarity, sharp wisdom. When George Floyd was killed, many saw reality, and tens of thousands felt the anguish and marched and raged with a potent energy. Some of it was violent. Some of that was effective. Recently, I've noticed how much violence people use against themselves, how much we insult and drive ourselves. And it makes sense, we're far from our goal. We need the energy of will to push ourselves. I want to be strong, so I attack myself for being weak. And unfortunately, this kind of energy doesn't work to heal the body. The more I attack my body, the more it tries to defend itself. My muscles contract. I can't breathe or talk, and then I panic, and they contract some more. And autoimmune disorders amplify that process, mounting the attack on cells that belong to me. So what's the alternative? So it's funny, after studying a lot of koans, in some ways they all seem the same. In the Blue Cliff record, this cat koan is followed by a sequel featuring Joshu, which I am not going to get into. His absurd response, absurd. But the koan after that really got to me. To roughly summarize again these kind of drive-by koans, an outsider asked the Buddha, an outsider, who's that? An outsider asked the Buddha, I do not ask about the spoken or the unspoken. And the Buddha kept his peace, remained silent. And that's it. And the outsider starts gushing about Buddha's great kindness and great compassion and how it opened everything up. And Ananda is there and he's like, what just happened? And the Buddha says, well, like a good horse, he goes at the shadow of a whip. Buddha kept his peace in the face of this odd question. What was he doing that's like a violent whip? Now, by the way, when I was in grad school for clinical psychology, we debated endlessly whether it was cruel or kind to withhold gratification, to remain silent. So the verse in this koan has the line, "A clear mirror is suddenly leaned on his stand and immediately distinguishes beautiful and ugly. Beautiful and ugly, distinct, the clouds of illusion open. In the gate of compassion, where is any dust produced?" The Buddha held the question. He held the outsider. He kept his peace without excluding anything. This is brilliant clarity, spoken, unspoken, perfectly expressed. Can we apply this to ourselves? The moment I stop trying so hard to breathe, the muscles release their grip. If I accept my voice, I stop testing it, just use it as it is. You'll hear me, and it'll be enough to express what I am. It is who I am. I'm a weakened body. I'm an autoimmune disorder trying too hard to save my host. I'm old. I'm out of fashion. I've lost my mother and my cat and my young body. And so what? If I let all that in, if I abandon my defenses and offenses, I'm utterly vulnerable and I'm utterly free, nothing to protect. I didn't make my body, but I do have to live in it. And I need to let go of trying to be what I'm not. Let go of my idea of self. And to heal racism, we also need to keep the peace, keep our peace, to be a clear mirror to how we participate in it. So systemic racism was in place before we were born, and now we live in it. How does it feel? It hurts, yes? But also, as you breathe into it, let's look under the word racism and just look at our tendency to divide. Imagine cleaning out your closet, finally tossing those things that don't spark joy, getting rid of the bad, yay. It feels good, right? It might feel good to despise our despot, but he's not the only guy dividing things. These are psychological ingredients in a racist structure. And together they create this tragedy that we're living in. Hold a mirror to that too, and keep the peace. For those of us who are categorized as white, we might feel guilty about what we have, but it might feel good too when we can buy organic food, when our kid gets to go to a good school. And how much of that are we willing to give up? The guilt doesn't really help us let it go. The self-flagellation, it mostly goes to creating and defending an image of a good person. How do we really let that go? Looking for answers, I hear Tokuyu talk about valuing brokenness. I hear Soshin talk about the tension of opposing desires. I hear Ria reminding us of the backward step, to listen to our own Dharma talk. I hear Roshi Joshin relentlessly reminding me to be in my body. Lady Gaga singing about the sign from above before we split in two. Ruby Sales calling her parents spiritual geniuses because they raised her to know that all bodies have worth, even if they're treated as property. And now she can ask, where does it hurt? And she recites a song, a spiritual. I love everybody. I love everybody in my heart. It's so hard to say that sincerely. All sentient beings, though, every part of myself. And she says also that love does not contradict anger. We need anger too. So, to keep our peace, we create abrupt change. Protest, shout, make phone calls, maybe even break things. Beautiful and ugly, distinct, the clouds of illusion open. My life, like yours, is not what it was. I have a moment to turn to my body now, relentlessly turn and relentlessly offer compassion. To face my trauma. So, when I was a toddler, I developed juvenile rheumatoid arthritis. And I was sent for 2 weeks to a military hospital where my family wasn't allowed to visit. I have no episodic memory of that trauma. I can only speculate how it affected me. But during this recent hospitalization, without visitors, the body memory woke up. I was completely controlled and also abandoned. I was dependent on people who didn't care about me, sure I was dying. I was enraged, I was helpless. One particular nurse was punishing and brutal, but I had to appease her because she was threatening restraints and a tracheotomy. And even talking about it, my whole core grips. But something was also different during this hospitalization. Well, my practice for one thing, but also you all. And my daughter was so actively involved, it was almost as if she was there. My brother flew out from California. We had FaceTime. Were texts and emails from the Sangha. You were praying for me. Sagan had access. She came to visit, a real person. And there was one resident who thought that maybe I had another autoimmune disorder, myasthenia gravis, and began to treat me for that. Well, to face this trauma, I have to go below the words because the memory is before words. The wordless memory reminds me to guard, to hold my breath, to fight. And reality, when I am open to it, reminds me to yield, to trust, to persevere, reminds me that I'm not separate. And in a similar way, our bodies have taken in the trauma of racism. I heard on Still Processing this morning that Black Lives Matter is not a call from the 21st century. It is, but it's also a call from 1619 that we're only now just hearing. There's been trauma for centuries. And our bodies have the answer to that, to the healing of the trauma. Resma Menachem, and I can put these links up in an email later if you guys want to read more, but he's a trauma consultant and he teaches about Black body trauma and white body trauma. And on a podcast, he stopped Krista Tippett mid-sentence and he asked her to notice what was landing from moment to moment. Notice the danger of speaking truth, really. And then he helped mend the racism in our contracted psoas by releasing it and engaging the vagal nerve. That's good stuff. I've learned in my own process that just paying attention to a thing changes it. I've learned that tiny invisible changes have to accumulate for a long time before you notice something's actually different. I've learned that setbacks are not the end of progress. Keep paying attention, and one day you'll have a conversation, you'll see a leadership change, community heal. What do you find when you breathe into your body now? We've been sitting for a while. I've been going on and on. Are you bored? Are you hungry? Are you activated? What thoughts and memories come up? Now is a good time to check in. Now is a great time for that backward step. We're on the eve of our summer ango, our intensive practice period, or our peaceful dwelling. And we have Shuso's questions to guide us and a beautiful text to challenge us. Clear mirrors are everywhere, beautiful and ugly, violence and love. The pandemic is our mirror, making it plain where the resources are and where they're not. Hundreds of thousands die, while the monks in the Eastern Hall argue with the monks in the Western Hall. Will someone speak and save the cat? I love everybody. I love everybody in my heart.